There's a saying among the galactic empires that humanity is unpredictable. They're a species that baffles scholars, frustrates generals, and confuses engineers from one end of the galaxy to the other. You see, when it comes to war, when it comes to technology and battle tactics, most civilizations follow a pattern. They design sleek ships, efficient fleets, and intelligent systems. They prioritize logic, precision, and advanced strategy. But then there's humanity, the one species that takes the rulebook everyone else has been using for thousands of years and throws it out the nearest airlock. I remember the first time I saw the ship. We had intercepted human signals about a new warship class they were testing, and I'll admit it, curiosity got the best of me. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a century into interstellar space, but they had already earned a reputation. Not as innovators, mind you, but as wildcards, the species that took seemingly the dumbest ideas and somehow turned them into victories. As the fleet commander of a sophisticated and advanced galactic navy, I was confident nothing would surprise me. I'd seen every warship design the universe had to offer. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with energy weapons, nimble cruisers outfitted with cloaking tech, destroyers capable of shredding fleets in seconds. Every ship designed for maximum firepower, efficiency, or stealth. Humans, I thought, surely would follow suit eventually. But when the human warship came into view, I was stunned. The first thing you should know is that human designs are ugly, hideous, even. Not the kind of ugly that suggests a dangerous weapon, but the kind that makes you wonder if their engineers are pulling some sort of cosmic prank. This ship, though, wasn't just ugly, it was ridiculous. It was massive, far larger than any warship I'd ever seen, its body sprawling out awkwardly like it had been cobbled together in a hurry. Some parts of it looked shiny and advanced, while other sections were rusted or covered in patched metal, as though the ship had been dragged out of a scrapyard and hastily rebuilt. Its silhouette made no sense either. Where other warships were aerodynamic and sleek, this thing was bulky and uneven, with massive protrusions jutting out at random angles. Enormous antennae, unnecessary in space, waved like spaghetti strands as the ship lumbered forward. And at its rear, a set of engines so oversized that they had to be attached with additional scaffolding. If it wasn't for the eerie glow of its power core humming beneath its hull, I'd have thought the ship was nothing more than a transport freighter that had been modified as a joke. I wasn't the only one confused. My bridge crew, seasoned veterans who had faced countless enemy fleets, stared at the screens in disbelief. One of my officers leaned forward, blinking as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Commander," he said slowly, is that their warship?" I didn't answer at first. I was too busy trying to process what I was seeing. Finally, I spoke, my voice thick with disdain. "That can't be it. This must be a decoy, some human ploy to confuse us." And I wasn't wrong to suspect it. Humans had been known to use unconventional tactics, like sending outdated ships with explosive payloads toward enemy fleets, or feigning weakness just to lure adversaries into ambushes. But the sensors didn't lie. The ship wasn't a decoy. It was real, and it was heading straight toward our fleet with the grace of a falling asteroid. The entire situation was absurd, and I wanted to laugh. This was humanity's great warship. Surely, it would fall apart before even firing a single shot. It looked like an accident, a floating disaster held together by sheer stubbornness. Even the other species watching the encounter with us, those who had also been monitoring humanity's progress, were equally baffled. Across the communications channels, I could hear murmurs and laughter echoing from allied ships. "Are they serious?" One captain chortled. "Is that a garbage hauler?" "No," said another, barely containing his amusement. "It's their flagship." That was when I made the mistake of underestimating humans, as so many had before me. I ordered my fleet into position, confident that we could overwhelm the slow, clunky monstrosity with minimal effort. Our weapons systems locked onto the target. I gave the order to fire. But before a single shot left our cannons, the human ship did something. I don't know how to explain it because it shouldn't have been possible. The giant, stupid-looking warship jumped, not a typical tactical jump. No. This thing lurched forward with a speed that defied physics, closing the gap between us in seconds. "Impossible," one of my officers shouted, his voice rising in panic. I didn't blame him. A ship of that size shouldn't have been able to move like that, let alone so quickly. And as the human warship drew close, it activated its weapon systems, if you could call them that. The ship's hull opened to reveal cannons, dozens of them, bolted to the frame in what looked like a haphazard fashion. Some were sleek and advanced, others mismatched as though scavenged from different eras of human history. Then they fired. The first wave of shots slammed into our lead cruisers, and to our horror, they worked. Our shields buckled under the barrage, unable to withstand the strange energy signature of the human weapons. The warship shouldn't have been able to deal that kind of damage. It didn't make sense, but there it was, tearing through our fleet with a force that sent panic rippling through the ranks. Evasive maneuvers. I shouted, but it was already too late. The human warship kept advancing, its oversized engines roaring with a sound we could hear even through the void of space. My fleet was well-trained, disciplined, and technologically superior, but none of that mattered. Against a species that refused to play by the rules, all our preparation counted for nothing. And that's when I realized the truth. The ship wasn't stupid at all. It was brilliant. Humans, in their endless ingenuity or madness, had created a vessel that defied convention, that shattered the expectations of every species watching. Its mismatched design, its unpredictable movements, its overwhelming firepower, it was all deliberate. It was the kind of warship only humans could have conceived, a ship that seemed too ridiculous to work, but succeeded because no one would ever expect it to. I watched, helpless, as the human ship continued its assault. My once unshakable fleet was in disarray, and for the first time in my career, I understood why the galaxy feared humans. They didn't win because they were smarter or stronger or more advanced. They won because they were different. The human warship turned slowly toward my command ship, its weapons systems locking on, and I knew there was nothing I could do to stop it. As I stared at the screen, the comms crackled to life. A human voice, calm, confident, and laced with amusement, cut through the chaos. "Didn't expect that, did you?" And with that, the warship opened fire. The ship's barrage struck my command vessel with unrelenting force, rattling the hull and flickering the lights across the bridge. Alarms blared as the shields gave way under the sheer, inexplicable power of the human weapons. I gripped the edge of the console, my knuckles pale as my officers scrambled for control. Sparks shot from damaged systems, and somewhere deep in the ship, I could hear the groaning of metal, an ominous sound I'd never once associated with defeat. "Damage report." I bark over the chaos, trying to keep my voice steady. "Shields at 30%. An officer called back, struggling to remain calm. "Their weapons are bypassing our energy defenses, somehow." I I don't understand how. I didn't either, but now wasn't the time for answers. Pull us back. Get distance. Engines are struggling, sir. The human warship pressed forward like a predator that had already chosen its prey. Its absurd bulk should have made it sluggish, easy to avoid, yet it kept pace effortlessly, closing the gap as if the laws of physics didn't apply. The bridge trembled again as another volley landed, each impact precise, methodical. I'd spent years studying warship tactics, but this was something different. The humans were toying with us. I glanced at the fleet status on the main screen. Ships scattered across the battlefield, struggling to reorganize. Our cruisers were no longer acting as a unified force, their formations collapsing under the disarray caused by this one ship. A single human vessel had turned a flawless navy into a retreating mess. My pride burned hotter than the fires spreading through my ship's lower decks. This is impossible, I muttered, almost to myself. How could they design something so crude and yet so effective? It was at that moment my communications officer interrupted. Incoming transmission from the human warship. Silence fell over the bridge. For a second, nobody moved. The audacity of it. They were hailing us mid-battle, mid-slaughter, as if this was some casual conversation. I clenched my teeth but forced myself to nod. Put them through. The screen shifted, and there they were. A human captain, smug, relaxed, and wearing an expression that infuriated me more than any weapon could. Their face was weathered, yet there was a spark of mischief in their eyes, as though they were holding back laughter. I had heard stories of human confidence, but witnessing it firsthand made it clear why they unsettled. Commander, the human said casually, leaning back in their chair like they had all the time in the galaxy. Rough day. I glared at the screen. Is this a joke to you? They shrugged, their expression almost sympathetic. Not a joke. Just business. You're the ones who decided to fire first. We're just here testing our new ship. This abomination of yours has no right to exist, I snapped. It defies every principle of warship design. Its systems shouldn't even function. The human's grin widened. That's what they all say at first. I was seething, but part of me couldn't ignore the truth. For all its clumsy, mismatched appearance, the ship worked. More than that, it excelled. How could a species with such little experience in galactic warfare create something so absurd and so dangerous? The pieces didn't fit. The human tilted their head as if studying me. You're wondering how we did it, aren't you? They said, almost reading my thoughts. How we made this ridiculous thing into a weapon that can turn your fleet into scrap metal. I stayed silent. Well, they continued, you'll find that humans are pretty good at making do with what we've got. Call it stubbornness, creativity, maybe a little desperation. We've had to survive on a world that didn't always play fair. What are you talking about? I demanded, though I couldn't hide my curiosity. The human's expression turned a little more serious. You ever heard of duct tape? What? Never mind. They chuckled to themselves, but their tone grew sharper. What I mean, Commander, is that you've underestimated us just like everyone else. You see a warship that doesn't look like yours, and you laugh. You think we're fools for building something so ridiculous. But that's your first mistake. I hated how calm they were. How completely in control of the situation they appeared. But their words lingered in my mind. How? I repeated. How does this shit function? How did you humans design this mess? The human captain leaned forward, their voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "We didn't build this ship to impress anyone. We built it to win." The screen cut off abruptly, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. For the first time in my career, I realized I didn't understand my enemy. I had faced countless adversaries before, ruthless, logical, efficient enemies, but the humans were none of those things, and somehow that made them far more dangerous. The warship loomed closer, and as its cannons charged for another strike, I barked orders to my crew. "Get us out of here. Full retreat." "But, sir," I said, "retreat." Reluctantly, the officers obeyed, and the engines flared as we began to pull back. Ships across the fleet followed suit, their captains coming to the same grim conclusion I had. We couldn't win, not against that. The human warship didn't pursue us. It simply hovered there, massive and ungainly, as if watching us retreat was victory enough. I didn't understand them, and I hated that. How could they build something so reckless and still come out on top? Where was their logic? Their strategy? Hours later, when we were safely beyond the battlefield, I reviewed the footage. Over and over again, I watched the ship, its strange shape, its crude systems, its baffling power. I ran simulations, looking for flaws, weak points, anything to make sense of it. Nothing did. My analysts were equally baffled. One of them approached me hesitantly. "Sir, we've analyzed the design of the human warship. It doesn't follow any of the established rules." "I already know that," I said bitterly. "No, sir, you don't understand. It's deliberate. Every piece of that ship looks random, but it isn't. It's layered, compartmentalized, each part designed to work independently so it can't be disabled easily. And those weapons? They're a combination of different technologies, old and new, somehow made to function together. It's genius, sir. Ingenious chaos. Ingenious chaos. That phrase stayed with me. Humans didn't build their warships to be perfect. They built them to survive, to adapt, to confuse and overwhelm. And somehow it worked. In the coming days, reports of the encounter spread across the galaxy. Our defeat became a topic of ridicule and fascination alike. Other empires whispered nervously about the human warship, trying to determine if it was a fluke or the first sign of something far worse. I knew the answer. Humans were just getting started. The days following our retreat were filled with endless strategy meetings and sleepless nights. The footage of the human warship played on repeat in every conference room, its bizarre silhouette forever etched in the minds of our commanders. It had become a symbol of confusion and, worse, fear. I found myself pacing corridors, replaying every moment of the battle in my mind, trying to find something, anything that could make sense of it all. The humans had managed to outwit us without even adhering to the basics of warship design. Their ship looked like a cobbled-together monstrosity, yet it moved like a predator with confidence and precision. Fleet Command was not pleased with the outcome. Reports of our humiliating loss had already circulated, and the rumors were spreading faster than light. Some of the other species in the galaxy were laughing behind closed doors. How could a technologically superior navy be outmatched by a single primitive vessel? They asked. The humiliation gnawed at my pride, but worse still was the lingering question of how. How could they do what they did? How could they win without following the rules? The answers, if there were any, came in scattered pieces. Analysts scoured every fragment of information. A junior officer presented their findings one morning with shaky hands, clearly terrified to speak in front of the assembled command staff. "The human warship's design, sir," they began, pointing nervously to a projection on the wall. "It's adaptable. Its systems are modular, interchangeable. If something breaks, the crew can reroute power or replace it entirely with whatever they have available. It doesn't rely on a central system like ours do. And, sir, its weapons." I cut them off, my frustration boiling over. "We know about their weapons. They tore through our shields as though they didn't exist." "Yes, sir," the officer stammered. "That's because their weapons are not conventional energy-based cannons. They're using kinetic bombardment solid projectiles, fired at near-relativistic speeds. Our shields were never designed to counter that." The room went silent. My officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and horror. "Kinetic weapons? Who still use such outdated technology?" Energy shields, which were the pinnacle of our defense systems, were designed to absorb or deflect energy-based weapons like lasers and plasma bolts. But solid projectiles, simple, brutal hunks of metal passed through them as though they weren't even there. It was a glaring oversight. "They're using outdated methods to exploit our over-reliance on modern defenses," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. The realization stung. We had built our fleet to perfection, confident in the elegance of energy-based warfare. And the humans? They had dragged the galaxy's most advanced navy into the dirt and beaten us with the simplest tools imaginable. Another officer chimed in nervously. "Sir, there's also evidence that the ship's crew has significant autonomy. Their command structure isn't as rigid as ours. Each section of the warship operates semi-independently, and the humans seem to rely heavily on improvisation during combat." Improvisation. That word hung heavy in the room. I could barely comprehend it. Humans were chaotic, impulsive, and reckless, yet somehow, those very qualities were what made them so effective. They fought like a species that had spent millennia surviving against impossible odds. And now they were coming again. A scout ship had detected the human vessel heading toward another contested system. The humans were on the offensive, and our fleet was being redeployed to intercept. Command's orders were clear: stop the humans at any cost. It was a matter of pride, but also of survival. If word spread that humanity could challenge the most powerful fleets in the galaxy, other species might begin to rally behind them or, worse, imitate their methods. The briefing ended, and my crew hurried to prepare for the upcoming engagement. I stared out the viewport of the flagship, my thoughts racing. The humans were clever, but I refused to believe we couldn't outthink them. If this warship relied on its unconventional design to succeed, there had to be weaknesses we could exploit. Perhaps their reliance on physical ammunition would eventually deplete their resources. Perhaps the modular systems that made their ship so flexible could also be a vulnerability if struck in the right place. Hours later, the fleet was in position. I sat in the command chair, my eyes fixed on the tactical display. Reports poured in as sensors picked up the human warship entering the system. It emerged from the edge of the gravity well, a lumbering mass of armor and weapons, its silhouette unmistakable, even at a distance. This time, there would be no surprise. We were ready. "All ships, hold formation," I ordered firmly. "We focus fire on its engines. Do not let it close the distance. Kinetic weapons are only effective at range. Keep them at bay, and we'll wear them down." "Yes, sir," my officers echoed, their voices filled with determination. The fleet spread out in a disciplined formation, ships forming a wide net to encircle the human vessel. My pulse quickened as the warship drew closer. It was alone, reckless, overconfident, exactly as I had expected. This time, we would outmatch them. The first volley of fire lit up the void, energy cannons releasing bright lances of light that streaked toward the human ship. For a brief moment, I thought we had the upper hand. The human vessel's shields flared against the assault, rippling like liquid, and I saw sparks scatter from its surface. Yet, it kept coming. Slowly, deliberately, its engines roared to life, and it began to accelerate toward us. "Maintain fire," I ordered. "Focus on their propulsion." More energy bolts pounded the ship, but somehow, impossibly, it seemed to shrug off the hits. It wasn't invincible, the damage was visible now. Black scars and molten holes peppering its hull, but it wasn't slowing down. My officers looked to me, their faces uncertain. And then the human warship returned fire. The first impact shook one of our cruisers, a massive kinetic round punching through its hull like it was paper. A second round struck moments later, and the ship detonated in a blinding explosion. The bridge crew gasped in horror. "They're targeting our capital ships," someone shouted. The humans weren't picking off smaller, weaker vessels. They were systematically eliminating our largest and most powerful ships first. It was a deliberate, ruthless strategy. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my mind racing. "Break formation," I ordered. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." But it was too late. The human warship plowed forward, undeterred by the damage it had sustained. Its cannons fired relentlessly, each shot devastating a vessel in our fleet. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Ships scattered, captains abandoning the rigid formations that had always served us so well. We were improvising now, just like the humans did, but we weren't nearly as skilled at it. I stared at the tactical display as more ships fell one by one. The human warship was a mess of twisted metal, smoke pouring from its wounds, but it kept fighting. How could they endure so much damage? Where did their resolve come from? "Sir, it's breaching our lines," an officer shouted. I turned to look out the viewport. The warship loomed larger now, a massive, scarred hulk bearing down on us with impossible determination. My flagship's alarms wailed as its targeting systems locked onto us. For the first time, I felt something I had never experienced in battle fear. The humans were closing in, and there was no escape. I could only watch as the final volley fired, streaks of light and kinetic death hurtling toward us. The moment froze in time, and I realized the terrifying truth. The humans didn't care about winning cleanly. They didn't care about elegance, strategy, or rules. They cared about survival, and survival was messy. The bridge shook violently as the final volley struck our flagship. Consoles sparked, alarms shrieked, and smoke billowed through the air, choking us. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my knuckles white as the force of the blast nearly threw me to the floor. But we were still here. Somehow, despite the carnage, the flagship held together for now. I coughed against the acrid air, trying to focus on the chaos unfolding around me. "Damage report," I bark, my voice hoarse. "Main engines are failing, shields at 0, hull integrity at 30%. An officer shouted back, his hands racing across the flickering console. "Sir, we won't survive another direct hit." I turned to the viewport, and there it was, the human warship. It was a battered ruin now, its hull blackened and twisted beyond recognition. yet it continued to advance through the debris field of what had been my fleet. How could it still be moving? Pieces of it were literally falling off, trailing wreckage and fire, but the humans refused to stop. It was like fighting a cornered beast that didn't know how to give up. My officers looked to me for orders, their faces pale and streaked with soot. For the first time, I had no answer. And then something unexpected happened. The human warship's forward cannons ceased fire. A ripple of confusion swept across the bridge, followed by a tense silence. "Why have they stopped?" I muttered. "What are they doing?" "Sir," one of the sensor officers shouted, "I'm detecting energy spikes from their core. It's impossible to confirm, but it looks like they're diverting all remaining power to their engines." My stomach dropped as the realization hit me. They're ramming us. The words sent a chill through the bridge. My crew froze, the implications hanging in the air like a death sentence. Ramming? It was a desperate, archaic tactic no one in this galaxy had used in centuries. But that shit, the humans didn't care about tactics or rules. They were proving once again that they would do whatever it took to win. My mind raced as the behemoth drew closer, its massive form blotting out the stars beyond the viewport. "Evasive maneuvers," I shouted. "Redirect all remaining power to thrusters." "We won't make it in time," an officer cried. The human ship barreled toward us like a freight train, its engines roaring to life with a final burst of energy. I could see debris peeling away from its surface as it pushed itself beyond its limits, like a predator making its last charge. Brace for impact. The collision never came. Just as the human warship closed the distance, it erupted in a blinding explosion. A force shook the entire flagship, throwing me forward as the ship groaned under the shockwave. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and for a moment I thought we were dead. But as the light faded, I realized that we were still intact. The human warship was gone, reduced to nothing but a burning cloud of debris. For several seconds, no one spoke. The only sounds were the distant groans of the ship and the crackling of damaged systems. I struggled to my feet, gripping the console for support as I peered out into the wreckage. Did they destroy themselves?" One of my officers whispered, his voice trembling. It seemed impossible. The humans had pushed their warship beyond its breaking point, sacrificing it in a suicidal attempt to take us down. And yet, against all odds, we had survived. I wanted to feel relief, to believe that this madness was over, but something didn't sit right. "Wait," the sensor officer said, his voice sharp with panic. "I'm detecting movement. Multiple contacts emerging from the debris." I spun toward the display, my heart pounding. New readings appeared on the screen, dozens of small craft, moving fast, too fast. They were human fighter ships, sleek and angular, pouring out from what remained of the warship's shattered hull. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. The human warship had been a distraction, a Trojan horse. They had used its destruction to launch a second wave. "They're boarding us," I whispered. Before I could issue a single order, the ship shuddered again as the first wave of boarding pods slammed into our hull. Red emergency lights flared to life, and alarms blared louder than before. Enemy craft had breached the outer decks. Someone screamed. The sounds of distant explosions echoed through the corridors as the humans poured inside. Our internal security systems activated, sealing off key areas, but it wouldn't be enough. The humans were already here, and they fought differently than any enemy we'd faced before. There were no drills, no hesitation. They moved quickly and purposefully, advancing like soldiers who had nothing to lose. Security teams to decks 5 through 9. Protect the core, I shouted, clenching my fists. Do not let them reach this bridge. My officers scrambled to follow the orders, but we all knew the truth. The humans had turned the tide of battle once again. They'd dismantled our strategy, first with their unconventional warship, and now with their soldiers. I stared at the flickering display, watching the enemy's forces spread through the ship like wildfire. Comms crackled, and a voice gravelly, human, cut through the chaos. To the captain of this vessel, we suggest you surrender. Your fleet is in ruins, your ship is compromised, and we're coming for you. Save yourselves the trouble. I gritted my teeth, rage bubbling up inside me. Surrender. The thought was unthinkable. But as the sounds of gunfire and explosions drew closer, it became clear just how far the humans were willing to go. They weren't just better at improvisation. They were relentless. I turned toward my officers, who looked at me with desperation in their eyes. We'll hold the bridge, I said firmly. If they want this ship, they'll have to fight for it. The sound of metal grinding echoed from the hallway outside. The humans were coming. I gripped the sidearm at my belt, preparing myself for what came next. If this was the end, I would face it with honor. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder how we had let it come to this. How could a species so chaotic, so unpredictable, tear apart everything we had built? The words tasted bitter, but they were necessary. The human soldier gave a short nod of acknowledgement, as if he'd expected nothing else. He turned to his squad, issuing quick orders, and they immediately began relaying the surrender signal to the rest of the fleet. The tension in the bridge seemed to lift, though the shame still weighed heavily in my chest. As I stood there, staring at the humans coordinating the ceasefire, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this war than I'd understood. They had defeated us, yes, but not with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They'd beaten us with grit, determination, and an ability to adapt that defied reason. And that's when I realized the truth, the unexpected twist in all of this. It wasn't their technology or tactics that made the humans so dangerous. It was their refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to do the unthinkable to survive. They had fought with ships that shouldn't have been able to fly, let alone fight. They had used strategies we considered foolish and desperate, and yet every single one of those stupid ideas had worked. As the last of the firing ceased and the battlefield grew quiet, I turned to the human soldier one last time. "What now?" I asked, my voice low. He regarded me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Now, you go home and you tell them what happened here. You tell them that humanity isn't what you thought it was." I frowned, confusion flickering across my face. "And what is humanity?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Relentless." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the ruins of my bridge. I watched as his soldiers secured the area, their movements efficient and controlled. The war was over, but the lesson was clear. Humanity was a force we had underestimated, a force that refused to be broken. And now, we would return home not as victors, but as witnesses to their resolve. As I sat in the silence of the damaged bridge, surrounded by the remnants of our pride, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before the rest of the galaxy learned the same lesson. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity wasn't reckless. Humanity was unstoppable. And the worst part was, they hadn't even needed the best warship to prove it. The silence after the battle was deafening. There was no victory cheer, No triumphant roar of success from the humans, nor from my crew. Just a heavy, suffocating quiet that weighed down on every person still standing. The human soldiers began withdrawing methodically, leaving behind a bridge that felt foreign now, hollowed out by defeat. My crew remained subdued, their expressions distant as though they couldn't yet comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. I could feel their eyes on me, but none dared speak. What was there to say? I had surrendered. The fleet, our pride, our purpose, gone in a single moment of choice. The human ship disengaged soon after, its power still unsettling to behold even in retreat. The towering vessel that had defied logic and dismantled our fleet now moved with eerie calm, as if it were just another day of operation. Its presence had become something of a nightmare for my people, but to the humans it was simply a tool absurd in design but efficient beyond belief. I stared at it through the viewport, the massive structure becoming a distant shadow in the void. How could we have been so wrong about them? How had we not seen it sooner? For hours, the bridge remained quiet as I gathered reports. Ships that could still operate limped toward the rendezvous point. Others floated lifeless, wreckage scattering through the stars. We sent recovery crews, where possible, but the losses were overwhelming. Officers were uncharacteristically silent, each grappling with their own guilt and shock. Some refused to meet my gaze as they passed, their disappointment clear without words. I bore it because I had to. I had made the decision to surrender, and now I had to carry that weight for all of them. The message from the humans spread quickly across what remained of our fleet. We were allowed to leave. That simple statement echoed through comms and across ships, disbelief in every tone that repeated it. They didn't stop us, didn't imprison or humiliate us further. They just let us go. Our warships formed a broken line as we set coordinates for home. It was a retreat, but it felt so much worse. Days passed as we drifted through the void, far enough now from the battlefield that the devastation no longer loomed on our radars. The silence on the ships was suffocating, but there was no way to avoid it. The losses were staggering. Thousands were gone, good officers, good soldiers, all wiped away by a single human warship and its fleet. I sat alone in my quarters, going over the damage reports until the numbers began to blur. Every name I read weighed heavier than the last. One of my officers, a veteran of the fleet, eventually came to see me. He looked as though he hadn't slept since the battle. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." I nodded, though I braced myself for the inevitable question. Why didn't we fight to the end? His voice cracked slightly, but his tone remained steady. We're warriors. That's what we were trained for. We've given our lives for less. Why surrender now? The question burned, though I had prepared for it. I stood and walked to the viewport, looking out into the void where the stars stretched endlessly. Because we weren't fighting to win anymore, I said quietly. We were fighting to die, and that's not what leadership is. He stared at me, confusion creasing his brow. But our honor would have cost us every life in that fleet, I interrupted gently. And what would we have gained? A handful of hollow victories. A fleet reduced to ash. The humans weren't looking for glory. They weren't interested in crushing us. They were trying to survive. And when someone fights for survival, they don't stop. They don't yield. The officer opened his mouth to argue, but paused, considering my words.
I turned to face him fully.
I saw the look in their eyes. They weren't fighting out of hatred or vengeance. They weren't like us, In that moment, we were fighting for pride. They were fighting because they had to, and they won because of it. He was silent for a long time, the realization settling heavily on his shoulders. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained somber. "I still don't know if they were merciful or just cruel," he admitted. "Maybe it's both," I said. "But they gave us a chance to learn from this, and that's more than we would have given them." When he left, I sat down, staring at the dark expanse of space. The truth was an uncomfortable one, but it couldn't be ignored. Humanity hadn't won because they were lucky. They hadn't won because they were better equipped. They had won because they were relentless. They'd fought with everything they had, no matter how absurd their methods appeared, and they had survived because of it. The war had exposed our weakness, our arrogance, but it had also shown me something else. We were not invincible, and perhaps that realization was exactly what we needed to avoid repeating the same mistakes. When we finally returned to our homeworld, the reception was nothing like the parades of old. There were no banners, no speeches, no cheering crowds. The docks were eerily quiet as the surviving ships made their slow descent, their damage visible to all. Crews disembarked in silence, their heads down, their shoulders heavy with shame. Families waited, searching for familiar faces, and the absence of so many was impossible to ignore. Reports of our defeat spread quickly. The council summoned me almost immediately, demanding explanations, answers, anything that could justify what had happened. I told them the truth. I told them about the humans, about their stupid warship that had torn through our ranks, about the choice I'd been forced to make. Some of them scoffed, others listened intently, but none could deny the outcome. The war was over. We had lost. The council members debated for hours behind closed doors, their anger barely contained. They had thought the humans would be easy to crush, but now they were left with the uncomfortable truth of our failure. And though some spoke of retaliation, I knew it wouldn't happen. We couldn't afford to fight them again, not now. In the weeks that followed, rumors began to spread through the ranks. Whispers of the humans' resilience, of their strategies, of their unexpected victory circulated like wildfire. Some officers blamed me, calling me a coward for surrendering. Others defended my decision, pointing to the lives that had been saved. Regardless of opinion, one thing was clear: the humans were no longer underestimated. I spent much of my time in isolation, reflecting on what had happened. My mind replayed the battle over and over, the debris, the burning ships, the moment the humans gave us mercy when they could have ended us. I thought about their warship, that ridiculous machine that shouldn't have worked and yet had been the most effective weapon I had ever seen. It wasn't the design that had won the battle, though. It was the people behind it. One evening, I received an unexpected message. It was from the humans, encrypted and translated into our language. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. We will fight only when we must. Remember this moment so we never have to again. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the words. I thought about the soldier on the bridge, the one who'd spared us, the one who had shown me what true strength looked like. The humans hadn't just won a battle that day. They had changed everything. They had shown us that survival wasn't about pride or power. It was about adaptability, about perseverance, about refusing to accept defeat even when the odds were against you. Years later, the galaxy still spoke of the war and the strange, stupid warship that had brought an empire to its knees. It became a story of warning, a lesson passed down through generations. But for me, it was more than that. It was a reminder that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it comes from the unlikeliest of places, and sometimes it's the ones you dismiss the most who teach you the hardest lessons. In the end, we never fought the humans again. We didn't dare, because we knew no matter how absurd their methods seemed, no matter how impossible their victories appeared, they would always find a way to endure. And in their endurance, they would win.